Well, thank you for all those that are attending today for our virtual event. We're joined here today by Dave Matthews from ArchTIS, helping us talk about data-centric security in Teams and SharePoint. Just going to run over a brief agenda. Got some housekeeping, some brief introductions, a little bit about Threat Protect, key considerations for data security challenges for today, common Microsoft 365 attacks, a bit more on ArchTIS NCT Protect, and a brief wrap up and Q&A session for any questions that do come in during the webinar. So just a bit of housekeeping today. Everyone will be muted during the presentation. There is an emoji section in the corner there. Raise your hand, any questions, do feel free to fire them in. We have a Q&A feature section in the corner, so feel free to ask any questions that pop up during the webinar. I'll help collate those and then we can answer those at the end of the webinar. And we also have a poll section there, which I'm going to kickstart. There's a couple of questions there. Feel free to do those during the webinar and help just really guide that across. And this session will be recorded for those that have missed it, or if you want to request and you share that internally, etc., feel free to ask for that link as well. Brilliant. So brief introductions, and I'm going to keep mine very brief. I'm the CISO here at Threat Protect, helping from consulting with customers, making sure that everything that we do is security focused, and really having that people, process, technology approach, which we'll explain more about. And we're joined, as I said, with Dave Matthews. And Dave, you'd like to give us an introduction to yourself?
Well, thanks, John, and thanks for having me here today. So I'm a technical solutions manager at ArchTIS. I've been an IT enabler for 22 years now and specialize in data security, not just in the tools that we're using to protect our data, but also in that journey that we take to deploy those solutions. So planning your policies, invoking a culture of adoption and change within your organizations as well. I'm dialing in today from Farnborough. It's not so sunny out there, but I do apologize if we got any background noise. The boys in the military over at Sandhurst are playing with the artillery today, so there's a few teeth rattlers in their arsenal. Apologies if that does come through on the recording.
Okay, I've had to kick the cat out, otherwise she'll be walking across the screen. And I think we're just jumping in a little bit about Threat Protect for those can see attendees that aren't a customer at the moment. Threat Protect, we are a London-based cybersecurity consultancy delivering personalised, focused range of security services. Everything we do, we are excuse me, very proud to be platform agnostic. Just making sure that everything in terms of aligning ourselves, we are meeting objectives, success criteria, and really being able to deliver that personalized approach for yourselves. As mentioned, we are very people, process, technology approach, in that approach. And we operate around 4 key objectives. That's managing cybersecurity, the risks around that, protecting against cyber attacks, and how we can help detect security events, and minimizing the impact of incidents. So that's very brief about Threat Protect. I know we're here today really to dive into what ArchTIS can do and how we can see the technology there help with understanding the threats within Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. So Dave, if I pass it over to yourself.
Excellent. Thanks very much, John. So just to start with, when we're talking about data security, often I like to approach with what I'd say is some basic questions that we need to ask. The first one, of course, is how sensitive is my data? You know, the actual value of the data that I'm sitting on. What would happen if this was potentially leaked or compromised in some way, even if it was just simply lost, you know, through hardware failure, accidental deletion, and similar. Once we've identified the data that has value within an organization, how should that be shared? You know, who should be able to access this data? And of course, what should they be able to do with it? Another question that we ask is, where does this data reside? as in where is it sitting, and then what are the controls, or what are the controls available to me to manage that guest access and security there. And with that comes then those protections, that level of protection. Finally, overall, we then have to ask about the sensitive data. Are we maintaining compliance through this? As we're all very aware, there are significant consequences if we fail in adhering to the compliance requirements that might be required by the particular industry that we're operating in. And then very briefly, recognizing also we're in a very transitional environment right now with the way we're working. We have a lot more of our users are working in a hybrid environment, a hybrid type setup, so at home and in the office. How we're accessing our data has moved from the traditional on-premise, secured behind a perimeter, with firewalls, authorized applications, and similar there. All of this has changed, and we're moving a lot more into collaborative approach to our to the way we work as well, with our users being much more mobile, making sure that we can give everyone insights into the same sets of data, that multiple users can work on these assets at the same time, and we're aware of who's making those changes, what are they changing, when were these changes applied. And when we think about this, we think about what's happened within the way we work. We then look at those traditional approaches to IT security and defense against some of these issues, and we realize, well, that secure perimeter that no longer exists. We're using different technology platforms. We have people working in different multiple locations. It's very much a transitional phase here. So we need to take a very close look at what we're doing and how we're applying those controls there to make sure that we're managing access to our data. So that's the topic, the subject of today's webinar, where I'll be sharing about our approach to data-centric security. Particularly, I'm going to focus around Teams and SharePoint as well, because there's quite a substantial adoption of those two platforms there. So firstly, I probably don't need to ask this question, but what is Microsoft Teams? Most of us should be very familiar, or at least be aware of this platform, that it's a business communications platform and part of Microsoft 365. We may know Teams best for its workplace chat and video conferencing, but Teams also offers fairly significant file storage and application integration. Teams was first launched back in 2017, and for a while there it was living alongside Skype for Business. But since the pandemic started, we've seen a mass adoption across a multitude of sectors. So conferencing platforms themselves have gained much more interest in workplace meetings, classrooms, even social gatherings have moved to a virtual environment. Back in April to July last year, Teams itself gained an additional 105 million monthly users. That's monthly users. So these are users who are active on the platform. And there's now over 250 million users logging into Teams on a monthly basis. So to that end, John L, I think we have our first poll, which was just to ask attendees, what are you using Teams for? Potentially conferencing, chat, file storage, guest access, or potentially something else, or even could be you're not using Teams at all within your organization.
Yes, and we've got some good results here, Dave. We've got teleconferencing, chat, guest access are all 100% in terms of their response in, and file storage.
File storage, excellent. I mean, that's interesting, because what we could do is, if we were able to compare that to 2 years ago, we might see a very different picture. Seeing there that file storage is being adopted certainly is something that's a little bit new to me as well in terms of the way I work on a day-to-day. But this just shows, this transitional phase that we're going through, that we've been pushed to work into with our response to the pandemic, and ensuring that we're able to retain productivity as well. So The Teams platform itself is a collection of a bunch of different services that are brought together in that single view pane. So most of us will be familiar with those chat and meeting functions, but what do we know about the components that are working behind the services? This is just a sort of a high-level overview of what we can see. And if I talk about this, when a new Teams channel is created, when I say Teams channel, we could be talking like groups within Teams. What actually happens behind the scenes is there's a new site collection and document library that gets set up in SharePoint Online. There's an Exchange Online shared mailbox that's made for your chat conversations. And there's also a hidden calendar created there. OneDrive gets utilized for any private file sharing that's taking place. OneNote has a notebook made for storing whiteboard interactions. And Teams creates ties into other 365 applications like Planner and Power BI as well. Then there's, of course, on top of that, there's also those meeting, video conferencing, voicemail, imaging, and other underlying services going on as well. So Teams is making use of Microsoft storage infrastructure to optimize the storage of these different types of data as well. And as you can see, what's actually going on behind the scenes is a lot more than what we actually present to those users. So considering all of that, what are we doing about security? First thing is, could be termed as good news, is that we should understand many of the 365 attacks that we're defending against now. These are common vectors that we've seen before. So we have phishing emails, these emails that attempt to trick a user into giving away their credentials. Malware in the form of attachments or links that have been shared, and malicious files. These are targeting unpatched or unprotected applications and systems. So we're used to responding to these. It's just a matter of the tools that we use to apply these policies. That's what we're looking to make use of now. And to guard against these attacks, many organizations are making use of these controls that are already offered by Microsoft. So the first approach is more of a policy. It's least privilege access, which is where least privilege means granting access only to the resources that's required by your role within the organization. We want to make sure that we don't provide users with access to more sensitive data than they need to, simply because if they are compromised, then we limit the impact of the damage that could potentially be done there. Multifactor authentication, this has been widely adopted. I see a lot more uptake of this, and multifactor is where we can get a text message or an authentication application on our phone that just wants to verify that we've just attempted to log in from a particular location. Maybe we have it on a cycle, so once every 2 weeks, you have to complete multi-factor authentication or similar there. We've got organizations that are limiting external sharing policies. Some are even going further now, and they're blocking forwards of emails to external users. These are great security policies in theory, but they can be horrible for productivity. When users aren't able to collaborate, then there can be frustrations. Even it can lead to users looking at ways they can work around those security controls in place. So now, not only are you fighting against potential threats from external attacks, but you've also got that user threat as well. And finally, you've got cloud app security and auditing, which is very useful. It provides a detailed trail of who did what, but this is usually only after the breach has already occurred. So the horse has already bolted from the stable in that matter. And I mentioned there, multi-factor authentication has been widely adopted and is quite well trusted, but just be aware, it's not always the most secure. It's not unbreakable. The fact is that an attacker, if they are able to obtain your user principal name, an access token, and a refresh token, then they're going to gain limited duration access to your environment. What that means is that an access token might gain them access to your environment for only 20 minutes, but in that time, if they've managed to gain access to an admin account, they can create other backdoor accounts. Or even if they're using a regular user's account, what can be done there is they can use that to send invites to allow another user free access to your sensitive data. And then there's our users. So human error is always going to be a vulnerability, and it's going to be the weakest link in any IT security strategy. Some recent examples of insider threats I've come across include employees who exfiltrate data when they're on furlough, when they're on gardening leave, or they've already been let go by the company. This data is often getting used for personal gain, maybe to sell, gain insights, or even offer secrets, customer contact details to a potential new employer. We've got another vector is other employees exposing customer records. We had this last year in South Africa. Experian exposed 250 million customer records, which is a pretty big whoops. They actually exposed this to an individual who was posing as a client, and that information included customer contact information like emails and phone numbers, date of birth, employment history. What you had here was a lot of their customers suddenly exposed, and that had fairly significant consequences for them in terms of rectifying and reducing the risks that their customers were exposed to after that. We've got employees who can fall for phishing attacks. How many of your users do you think use the same password at work and on their home accounts? How many of these users potentially could click a fake PayPal or banking link and then enter their information into a phishing website? Those credentials are now being sold on a list somewhere, most likely sitting on the dark web and available to be downloaded. And then there's working from home, bringing those risks into the workplace. You might not have heard of phishing attacks. It's not as widely publicized, but phishing is basically voice phishing, where someone calls up impersonating an IT administrator from your organization. And what they're doing is they're calling your employees at home. The most well-known result of this was Twitter getting caught out back in July 2020 by phishing attacks. And the fallout from some of their administrators getting compromised knocked 20% off of their share price. The final vector there for user threat or insider threat is the classic sending an email to the wrong person. You might be meaning to send an email to Diane. It goes to Dwayne. I'm sending it to Chris, but I've gone and sent it to Christine. And this famously happened in London to an HIV clinic when they sent a newsletter to 800 recipients, but they'd meant to use the blind copy or the BCC field. What they actually did was they left the names and emails visible in the to field. And this was exposing the names and personal emails or even work emails of clinics or of customers or patients that had attended this HIV clinic. So some of these patients themselves had only come in for a checkup. They never even had HIV, but now they were being published on a list. And that mistake in the end cost that clinic over £180,000. So to counter these risks, we should be asking ourselves very basic questions. Who has access? What activities taking place? Who is allowed to create and manage teams within our organization? And consider, is this another job for IT admins or should it be the data owners? Will they be sharing sensitive data? So again, if the IT admins are owning this role, should they have access to the content, the data contained within the files and within the chats being shared within those messages, those Teams chats? Do you require some form of information barriers to prevent that data spill, so prevent these unauthorized users? And of course, should you be allowing guest access within your organization? So we've got the second poll, just outside of Microsoft Teams, what other collaboration platforms are you using? And I've listed a few here. So WebEx, Slack, Google Workspace, Zoom. You could be using another, we've got GoToMeeting. We're on Zoho today. Or maybe you're using none. Maybe you're only exclusively using Teams. So just give everyone a few seconds to finish answering that there as well.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think everyone's been super proactive, so thank you all for that. The polls have already been populated, so we've got Slack and Zoom, the top runners at the moment.
And not a surprise with, particularly with Zoom itself, has been widely publicized. They got in trouble initially because there was such a massive uptake and there was potential exposure in their own security policies, which they've done a lot of work to close the doors on that. What I have found interesting in doing my own research is that there's some other platforms that are being adopted quite widely as well. There is Spike, which has been used quite widely. Mattermost is an open source platform that's being used by a lot of technology companies. We've even got Amazon have come to play with a new platform called Chime. And of course, Facebook are using Workplace, but I think a lot of we're seeing slower adoption of that outside of companies that work fairly exclusively on that platform.
Funny, Dave, a lot of those probably haven't heard of myself, to be honest with you, but it does open that shadow IT conversation, really, doesn't it?
Exactly. Consider who's doing what and who's using what, and what exactly they can do, what information can be shared. I know some organizations we're talking to right now have problems with WhatsApp, simply because it resides on phones, and if phones are in pockets, then you've got potential to be compromised internally there. But I'll come more to that very shortly as well. So let's look at dynamic security across our Teams channels and some of the scenarios where dynamic protection could add security above and beyond what's native inside of a 365 environment today. So in this image, we've got an organization that's working in a hybrid setup. They've got an on-premise instance of SharePoint, and they're leveraging Office 365 with Teams and SharePoint Online. We can see we've got 3 users that are accessing SharePoint from 3 different locations. There's a project analyst working in a corporate office. We have a developer working remotely, and then we've got a manager who is sitting in a coffee shop. They've each got a different role and therefore have different needs with the data. So there may be different security policies that are applied to each of these users. And if we look at the diagram, you can see which documents each of these users has access to, and we can see that some of that data resides in the cloud and is available to all 3, regardless of their location and security requirements. So what we need here is contextual access rules, where we can protect sensitive files based on the conditions of the user who is accessing the file. So let me introduce you to NC Protect's real-time attribute-based access controls, or ABAC for short. NC Protect adjusts data security and protection protocols in real time by considering the correct state of both the user and the file. So access rights are based on the properties of the file, including content sensitivity and the user's context when the file is accessed. Using ABAC, NC Protect can automatically apply encryption, read-only access, dynamic watermarks, or restrict actions a user can take, such as preventing downloads, duplication, and printing. Probably the easiest way to explain this is to give you a real-world example, such as my current situation. So right now, I'm talking to you and logged in from my home office. I'm using a company-issued laptop that's managed with authorized software, security policies, and I'm currently connected to our corporate network via a VPN. I'm in a secure environment, but, well, at least the bedroom door is closed, and I'm using authorized equipment. As such, I've got full access to required files and documents. And because of the nature of my role, this includes customer contact information. There'll be some project files around, what we're working on with them. And through that, I have some insights into sensitive operational data there as well. But after this presentation, I'm going to probably take a break, head down the road to Wild Bean and get myself some coffee. And while I'm there, I'll probably check my emails, Teams notifications on my phone. Now, the conditions of my access will have changed. So when I'm down at the shop, I'm on an unmanaged Android device. I'm in a public location connected to the shop Wi-Fi or 5G. And despite me authenticating, multi-factor, and what have you, the conditions of my environment have changed. So any sensitive information, such as those contacts, projects, and operations data, needs to be protected. And that's where ABAC applies and starts working in practice. So you're going to have this challenge across all of your collaboration tools. So this includes 365, SharePoint on-premise, other collaboration applications as well. So imagine if you can secure all of this content with a single solution. And to that end, let's jump over into an actual demonstration of NC Protect in action. So what I've got here is I'm looking at SharePoint Online. I'm logged in as a user within this environment. I'm currently logged in as Alan Pierce. And you can see everyone who's in this environment is considered by SharePoint to be a data owner. Ignore Avalo, he's actually another employee of ArchTIS, but everyone else here is a data owner. In other words, or a site owner. So they have full control to the data we've got located here. Now, we're using SharePoint as a file store. So we're using the document library. and I've put a bunch of files here. We have also applied a classification, an audience classification. Now, this is actually managed through SharePoint. So this is just internal policies, native M365 controls. So whenever someone uploads or creates a document, they have to mark the audience. So you give the file a name, and then you mark it for the audience, which could be internal, confidential, or public. We're using user-driven classification here, but it doesn't have to be user-driven. We can use automated, so actual discovery tools, or if you're using Microsoft sensitivity labels, Azure Information Protection, Microsoft Information Protection, their own automation tools, we could be using those labels here as well. So we've got these documents. They've all got their various names. They've got their external classifications. We've also got this marked for privacy, and this is NC Protect performing a classification scan in the background. What we're actually doing with privacy is we're looking for PII. So can we see any information that identifies a person's date of birth, marital status, family relational information, passports, other details like that. And we simply have a passed or failed condition. So if the document failed the scan, in other words, if our scan found PII or potential PII, it gets marked as failed as well. So I can just work with these documents. I can open them. I can modify them as I need to as Alan. But if I copy across into another browser, so into Firefox, if I copy that same site and connect here, log in into Firefox. I'm logged in currently as Megan, Megan Bunn. Now, Megan's in classic view. I'll just change her back to the full rich view of SharePoint. So it looks the same there. So you can see now, Megan is looking at the same location, but can only see files marked for internal or public access. In other words, what's happened here for Megan is we've trimmed the view. So we've made sure that anything that is considered highly confidential or sensitive is changed based on the conditions of their access. Now, in this case, the conditions of their access is just simply they're not a member of the management team. But that we could be using the likes of, they're using an unauthorized browser, they're using Firefox, or they're logging in from a location outside of our corporate network, or they're using an unauthorized device. They're not on a Windows PC. They're not on an authorized MacBook. Maybe they're using an Android device or similar there. You can use those conditions to trim their access and restrict what they can actually see. And then they're still able to work with the document. So I can open up one of these documents here, and it opens up in the Word application, or they could download it and open it in Office as normal. They can also open a document here, though, Deborah Berger's profile, which failed the scan. And as I'm clicking, it's not responding. That's all right. Let's refresh this. Do it live. They always say do it live. In fact, let's just jump over. I did open it in the background earlier. So this is Deborah Berger's profile. The document has opened in a secure viewer. So what we've actually done here is, because it failed the PII scan, we've redirected it to be open in a secure reader using NC Protect. And what this does is it re-renders the Word document as an image. So you can see here, I can no longer copy and paste from that document. If I try and grab and drag, I just end up picking up the image. I've also applied a watermark to the back of the document. So I can see Megan Bunn open this document on the 10th of February today. I could put more information. I could say the time. I could give the name of the device. I could put the IP address of this person. So all of that information appears in the background. And what that does is that discourages Megan from trying to find a way to work around these controls, like taking a screen cap or photographing. And I mentioned photographing with your phone. That's the WhatsApp problem that one of our customers has been coming across, where they have users who are actually taking photos of sensitive documents, uploading it via WhatsApp over to an external person, and then that was being shared publicly on Facebook groups of all things. So by applying these controls here, we can now see where that information is potentially coming from. The last part of what we've done here is we've also, within this document, we've applied redaction to content. Now I'm just using a simple keyword check, but we can use additional rules here. So we can say, if we find an email address, if we find a person's date of birth, if we find other information there, we can redact that. And we can either put text into replacement, blank space. We could put an image if we wanted to, and cover off of that there as well. So This is where you can apply controls to ensure that the user can't replicate, duplicate, download, make copies of the data, and similar there. And also just in the background, if I try and right click as well, that's been disabled through the controls applied to this page. And this doesn't just apply to SharePoint, this could apply to Teams as well. So a Teams chat where Megan was sending some information here just to the general project team within this organization. And we can see here NC Protect has intercepted and again replaced the content of that chat because of the level of sensitivity. Maybe it was the security label on the document, maybe it was something else contained within the document. So we've replaced that with an image just to let everyone know this information has actually been redacted. Or if we attach another document here, we can also again force that back into that secure reader. So we can make sure that again watermarks are applied here to a PowerPoint presentation, so they're not able to duplicate and copy that and share that externally as well. So that's for Megan, who is a user, who's part of the project team, but not a manager within this organization. They are still able to collaborate. They're still able to access the documents that they're authorized to access and exchange information within teams without potentially overexposing their organization. But if we go back over to Alan, he's also got some additional controls here within Teams itself. So looking at that general chat, you can see here we've got this NC Protect tab that's been added there. And this gives Mark additional tools such as the access type to this team. So we can leave it with the native Teams controls. We can set this group to be private, so we can only invite users that are authorized. Now we might use Active Directory groups. We might use a lookup list within SharePoint to grant that access there. Or we could also archive this chat, so we can make it read-only, which means we've got the information. If you need to download the documents, they'll be visible through Secure Reader, and similar there, we can actually lock things down. We can restrict guest access. So if our organization does choose to go and allow guest access to conversations and similar, we can actually enable guest access here and restrict again the users to an authorized list. And finally, you can apply protection to this channel. So again, using native controls, we can say that all documents, all files that are shared within this are going to be redirected through Secure Reader. Or you could use Microsoft's own RMS controls to apply encryption and similar there. So when we use RMS, it means we can either encrypt the documents as they open it up here, or when they download that document to a desktop, again, watermarking restrictions are applied whenever they go to open that document based on the content and based on the tagging that's taking place in the background. Customization of watermarks, and again, we can apply this policy to a single chat. So I could go into my chats and see the same controls. I can apply them to different Teams groups and channels within my organization. But I have this this ability to take control of the chat, of the conversation, so that none of our users, none of the participants in this particular chat can also accidentally or unnecessarily expose our data there externally as well. Jumping back to the SharePoint library, Alan also has the ability to review the documents that have been uploaded and saved. So if Alan was to go through and we look at that Deborah Berger document, if we click here on the failed conversation, on the failed privacy scan, what we can see is we can see all of the checkpoints that failed and those that passed the scan. So we did find in this conversation an email address, we found marital status, we found social security numbers, national ID numbers, and similar there. So this was the content that was located, and if I want to find that in the document, I just simply click on the link, and this loads a text version of the document in the background and highlights exactly where that information can be found there. So this is really useful, especially if you've got complex documents and you want to go through and validate the results of the scans. We can then use these clues here to find where that information resides. And you can see I'm just using some very basic scans here, but we could use regular expressions to validate those credit card numbers to make sure we can identify this as a MasterCard and a Visa based on the number alone. Or we can actually go further. We could say a credit card number on its own is worth 50% of a match. what I need to find now is the name of the credit card, so MasterCard, Visa, American Express, an expiry date or something that looks like an expiry date, a reference to a security code or CCV, and you can have each of those clues has their own weighted score associated with them, which means that we elevate this document from being, it looks like sensitive, to this is definitely sensitive. We need to protect this information. And just very briefly, I don't want to take too much of your time looking at what's going on behind the scenes, but in terms of actually managing the platform, it's very simple. We have our attributes, the properties. So what are the data attributes? Are we looking at sensitivity labels? Are we looking at the author of the document? Are we looking at the location that the document was saved? And we combine that with the user attributes. So again, the user's role, their security clearance within our organization, the device, the location they're logging in from, and we combine these in the rules. So if I look at that dynamic access rule, you can see here this top one, protect confidential data. This is where we were applying these controls to restrict access to anything that contains the internal confidential condition. And if the user is not a member of the management team, then we deny access. And I have the ability to apply this to a single site collection, a single library, or I can say this goes across the entire organization. You've got granular controls there when you set up the scope. Of course, in my lab, I've only got a very simple site that has been set up here as well. And that can be applied further to like the secure document rules. So I can choose how the watermark's applied, when encryption is applied, when it isn't. Ribbon rules allow me to set controls such as if I have an IT administrator, they're not allowed to open these documents, but they can still access and change permissions. They can modify the content. They can, maybe they can duplicate the document or similar there. You can use those rules there to apply a greater level of control and prevent that accidental data spill to unauthorized users. And lastly, you've got your compliance requirements. So again, if you want to perform a bit of classification, some data discovery, and find out where does our sensitive data reside, how much of it do we have at the moment, how much of that data has got exposure to, the everyone group, anonymous access is allowed or similar there. We can set up some rules here within compliance to identify that data. And then you've got additional tools that you can use to go and modify those permissions if you want to and make changes there. So just jumping back in as well, those are some of the key capabilities there and features that I've demonstrated where NC Protect is applying attribute-based access controls to traditional file shares, email, and attachments as well. The platform does contain a number of other features. We've got permission map scans, so we can see who's got access to your data. Again, how much of this is potentially exposed to external users. Data discovery. We've got integration with the likes of SIEM solutions. So if you do have security reporting tools, if you want to integrate with a reporting console such as Azure Sentinel, then we have integrations available there. You can use our platform to identify duplicate files. How much time are we wasting? How much resource are we consuming protecting the same files time and time again? And we can retroactively go and apply permission updates to the content as well. So if you were to deploy NC Protect in Office 365 today, you could roll out a fix to disable all anonymous and external access for any files in your organization that have been shared for more than 30 days, or 60, 90 days, or even 365 days. You can go and retroactively apply those controls in short order to lock down and ensure your environment has been secured. So the platform itself is very fast and easy to deploy. NC Protect can be deployed in the cloud as a resource group or on-premise as a Windows server. It is an agentless platform. So that means that there is no software to install on your devices. NC Protect works more like a secure gateway. It's a lens through which your users are accessing data. It's fully supported by Microsoft. We're part of the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association. So we make use of Microsoft's own security labels, their rights management service, and Azure's conditional access controls. That's where we can ensure that users are redirected through the NC Protect portal to access your data. And on that front, there is a hidden value here, is that NC Protect isn't actually changing your data. You don't have to move it to a new environment. your existing investment in role-based access controls, those security groups, any data tagging potentially that you've applied, or other integrations, they all still matter. They can, in fact, those values can be pulled in as attributes and used by NC Protect to apply those dynamic access rules. NC Protect itself is simple and fast and scalable. So if you would like to know more, or you would like a one-to-one demo where we can discuss your specific requirements, then do please reach out to John and the team at Threat Protect, and we'll only be too happy to join you on a call. So with that in mind, I think we've got some time for questions with John now, and I will hand back over to see if you've got any you want to share.
Dave, that was amazing. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that demonstration and the insights there. I think two features for me that really stood out were the watermarking feature, and having that level of protection there from, especially from the DLP element, and the chat blocking. How often do you see people copy and paste passwords and any of that type of security information across just because it's easy to get across to a colleague or something like that, and not taking into consideration the level of the access there that you have. There is some questions, so thank you all for populating those. First one we have is, I have Microsoft security tools already. What does this give me that I can't already do with Microsoft?
That's a really good question. I'm glad that's been asked. So Microsoft themselves, they do have a fairly comprehensive set of tools. They are constantly subject to change. They are adding to those as well. But what we're offering is information barriers. So the likes of regional access, links with a limited time to live, those retroactive rules where we can block those links that are older than a certain period. Microsoft don't offer the dynamic watermarking, that secure viewer, or the conditional access, the attribute-based access controls neither. The other thing to be aware of is that a lot of the security policies offered by Microsoft are binary. It's either switched on or it's turned off, even down to their automatic classification. It relies on Boolean keyword searches. So it's either a match or it's not a match. There's not a lot of context or flexibility in the security controls that you're offered there by Microsoft. So we're able to answer some of those questions, those shortcomings. A lot of customers that we actually are working with are the ones that have wanted to adopt these technologies, but they have been hesitant to move forward simply because their own risk assessment has been, it gets close, but it's not, there's still enough of a risk factor that we don't want to move all the way. And that's where we're able to cover those gaps there. And as I was able to show there as well, we're able to cover those gaps without making significant change if you've already started investing in some of those tools there as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that. I think another good question, especially with new products, is the assisted part. Is there any out of the box rules and policies to help?
Yeah, definitely. So we've got a lot of common use cases that are being asked for by customers. The likes of a high-level risk assessment. I just want to scan my library and find, do I have any documents that have the word password in the title? Do I have any documents that are exposed to the everyone group? Are there potential risks there with the content that's contained therein? We've got policies that are ready to go, and you can use those as a template to build upon and to expand into your own rules. I mentioned right back at the start, part of my role within ArchTIS and within data security is the journey, not necessarily the destination. How do we get to that point? So the out of the box rules are always being updated, modified. The most recent one that's been added is where we have Teams groups, where you might have a boardroom meeting where you have a camera that's shared on a shared system there, but you don't want the next person to use the meeting to be able to see the chat from the previous meeting. So being able to lock down resource accounts there, that's another out of the box rule that will be added to a future build as well. So yeah, we've got those controls ready to go out of the box, and of course, working with customers who are likely to provide, we'll run a proof of concept or a trial with them as well. We take a lot of that and we're able to create some of those rules, create some templates so that you're ready to go quickly and effectively from day one.
That actually leads us on quite nicely to the next question: is how long does it actually take to set up NC Protect?
Oh, that's a good question. So NC Protect is the actual deployment of NC Protect is very straightforward. I mean, I'm talking you know, a couple of hours to actually get it deployed and in place. To then turn on the controls and to start redirecting your users, that can vary from organization to organization. But if you want to just simply see, does this work? How do these controls, how are they applied? And similar there, it's a very straightforward process to get that up and running. And then you've got the ability to start applying and rolling out as you would to your wider organization over a period or a time frame that suits your organization. Again, pulling back to the fact that we're not changing what's already in place and what's working and existing. When you want to redirect all of your organization through NC Protect and start applying ABAC to everyone, that's down to you for when you flick that switch. But the platform is there to be deployed and modified in the background within a time frame that suits your resources and availability.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dave, so much for that. I think that's all the questions that we have today.
Excellent. Good stuff.
Well, I think that leads us on to the wrap up. And I don't know if there's another slide. Oh, there we go. But thank you all for joining. Really appreciate the time and effort that you have to join us today. David, thanks for joining us. Really amazing. Thank you so much. I've joined a few webinars with you so far, so and always the demonstrations on point. So really appreciate keeping that really high level, like technical, and diving into there. The session today will be recorded, so if you would like to have a link to that, please do ask. Otherwise, I believe Johnny, our amazing marketing lead, will be chopping the video up and making a YouTube version for us. So if you're not following us on YouTube, please do. We do like to make a lot of this content, educating, understanding what challenges are, what the future holds, etc. So and that's where we want to deliver a lot more of these. If there's, as Dave said, any detail from the webinar today or any slides that you'd like to get hold of, or perhaps speak to Dave and dive into the technical side of it, I know he's more than willing to help. Please do feel free to reach out, and feel free to contact myself directly as well. More than happy to share my details at the end of this as well. So thank you all again, and hopefully see you at the next one.